of mind to say, wait a minute, you can't do this. You may not like him, you may hate him, I'm not crazy about him myself, but he is our half-brother. We just can't do this. So they throw Joseph into a pit till they can decide what they're going to do with him. In the meantime, they look in the distance. Here comes this caravan along the way, riding camels. And they stop these men and they say, hey, we've got a brother here that we really don't care for. We will sell him real cheap. So they sell him for 20 pieces of silver. They take them, these human traffickers, take Joseph into a place called Egypt, to a place he has never been before. You say, man, things are really bad for Joseph. Oh, cheer up, they get worse. Joseph is sold to a man by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar owns this big plantation. Potiphar is kind of a high muckety-muck up in the administration of Pharaoh, who was the ruler of all of Egypt. And so Joseph becomes just a menial, run-of-the-mill, minimum wage slave. But it's not long until Potiphar realizes, this kid's something. This kid's got talent. This kid's sharp. And so Joseph rises in the ranks, and all of a sudden, he has put Joseph in charge over the entire plantation. Everybody now is answering to Joseph. Joseph is doing everything right. He's handling this man's affairs with complete integrity. He trusts him with the checkbook. He trusts him with everything, everybody. The plantation's never made more money. Things have never been better. And he's grown to love this young man like a son. However, there was a problem. Potiphar was married to this hot mama. And she was a desperate housewife on steroids. And Joseph's not having it. And he says, look, I can't sin against my master. I cannot sin against God. And so every day this goes on. She keeps trying to seduce Joseph. He's not having any of it. Finally, he's walking through the living room, minding his own business. She literally grabs him by the coat to drag him into the bedroom. He is so afraid. He runs off. He leaves his coat, and now she's ticked. She's embarrassed. She feels humiliated, and a woman scorned. Well, you know the rest of that story, right? So Potiphar comes home. She's ripped her blouse, torn her dress. She says, look at what this young man, you love this young man. This young man tried to rape me. Without a fair trial, without any trial, without giving any chance to present his side of the story, he's thrown in prison. And he spends 13 years in prison for something he didn't even do. So here's Joseph. He's gone from the pit to the plantation to the prison. Hasn't done one thing wrong. He's gone from the penthouse to the outhouse and doesn't deserve any of it. But the story doesn't end there. Through a series of events, he meets this guy in prison, this man in prison. And this man had a dream, and Joseph interprets the dream because God is with him. The man later is hired to go work for Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream. It's a terrible dream. It's a bad dream. It's a nightmare dream. And he knows something bad's going to happen, but he doesn't know what it is or how to deal with it. So he calls all the magicians and all of his cabinet together, and they can't interpret the dream. And Pharaoh's about to tear his hair out. He's about to commit hara-kiri, and this man says, hey, I met this guy in prison. His name's Joe. I can't explain it, but this guy has a relationship with this God, and he's got the ability to interpret a dream. At least he interpreted mine. Pharaoh says, go get him. So they send for Joseph. They give him a shower. They clean him up. They cut his hair, shave his beard, put him in a nice, suit. He goes to see Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him the dream. Joseph perfectly interprets the dream, tells him about this worldwide famine that's going to come, tells him how to handle the famine. Pharaoh is so impressed. He said, son, how would you like a job? And he says, well, what's the job? How would you like to be the prime minister of Egypt? Joseph says, I can't start until now. And so Joseph becomes the prime minister of Egypt, and all of a sudden, he's now the right-hand guy. All of a sudden, he's out of the outhouse. He's in the real pit house. And now we fast forward a few years later. Guess what happens? Through a series of events, he comes face to face with, guess who? His brothers. Hot diggity dog. Okay, have you ever heard the word payback? Yeah, his brothers who put him in the pit. Those brothers. Those brothers who sold him into slavery. Yeah, those brothers. Those brothers that caused him to be falsely accused of rape. Yeah, those brothers. Those brothers who caused him to spend 13 years of his life in a prison for something he didn't even do. Yeah, those brothers. Those brothers who made sure his life was not fair. Those brothers who made sure he paid the time even though he didn't do the crime. Yeah, those brothers. But 2 small 3-letter words changed the entire meeting that he had with his brothers. And those words were, but God. But God. But God moved. And this God, what I want you to hear today is this. As we unfold this incredible story of this young kid named Joe, what this God did for him, this God is doing for you. What this God took him through to get him to where he wanted to be, this God is taking you through what you're going through to get you where he wants you to be. And what he did for him, he's doing for you. And let me tell you something. There's some of you in this room right now, your life is ruined. You know why your life is ruined? It's not because of what somebody's done to you, it's how you've responded to it. You're eaten up with bitterness, you're eaten up with anger, you wish they'd fall off a cliff and die every day of your life, and you're disappointed when they don't. I got news for you. Life's too short to live that way, ladies and gentlemen. It's just too short. So I want to share with you how these 2 little words can totally change the perspective of your life. What God did for him, he is doing for you if you'll trust him. 3 things, we'll write these down real quick. Number 1, God is achieving his plan in my life. God is achieving his plan in my life. Now, this was not the first time Joseph had used those 2 words, but God. He'd used those words before with his brothers. As a matter of fact, a few chapters earlier, when he and his brothers had first met, they didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And when the secret finally came out, when Joseph finally couldn't keep it in any longer, and he lets them know that, hey, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother, and they're all collectively going, oh no. Joseph says, that's okay. But God sent me ahead of you. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Now remember, this all started when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. And now they're worried, okay, payback time, we're dead, we're going to be hung from the highest tree. And Joseph said, oh, no, 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 no. Thank you. Thank you for what you did. Joseph, whatever you're drinking, we want a cup of it, okay? No, listen. You sold me, but God sent me. You sold me, but God sent me. You see, those 2 words, but God, changed everything. Joseph finally got it. Their plan was to eliminate Joseph. God's plan was to elevate Joseph. Their plan was to lower Joseph into a pit. God's plan was to lift Joseph into a palace. Their plan was to desert Joseph. God's plan was to deliver Joseph. Their plan was to sell Joseph out. God's plan was to lift Joseph up. And that's why Joseph could say to them, you intended to harm me. You did. Yes, you did, and you wanted to do it. But God intended it for good. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you have gone through. I don't know what you will go through. I don't know what you may be going through right now, and I am not trying to make light of it. Listen, I don't know how unfairly you've been treated. I don't know how unjust your circumstances are. I don't know what kind of hand you've been dealt. But let me tell you what I do know. What I do know right now, if you'll open your ear and you'll listen, here's what God is saying to you right now. Everything is going according to my plan. Everything's going according to my plan. Because listen to this. Think about this. You're as excited about this as I am. I am pumped. Because listen, every time Joseph thought his life was over, God was just getting started. Every time, listen, when God seems far away in your life, you know where God is? Right next door. When you can't see God, God's moving. When you can't hear God, God is speaking. Now understand something, don't you misunderstand me. Joseph was not saying, this verse is not saying, I am not saying, and the Bible does not say that everything that happens to you is a good thing. Because I promise you, it's not. Joseph's kidnapping was not good. Joseph's enslavement was not good. Joseph's imprisonment was not good. What you're going through right now may not be good, but here's what this verse says. Whatever is happening to you, whatever people are trying to do to you, what others mean for evil, God says, I promise you, I give you my word, and I do not lie. I will take it, and I will turn it for your good. I override everything. I override everybody. I'm the one. They're not on the throne. I'm on the throne. They're not in control. I'm in control. I will see to it. It will be for your good. I promise you it will be. See, God never has to say this, well, that wasn't in the script. God never has to say, wow, didn't see that coming. God has everything in the script. Here's what God says. Look, in the movie of your life, there are going to be valleys and deserts. There are going to be bad times. There are going to be bad things. But when the movie ends and the credits roll, it will all be for your good. You know, here's what I love about God. God never has to go to plan B. You know why? Because plan A always works out. Because God only has one plan, it's plan A. And it always works out. You know, there are three things I have found, and if you'll think about it, you'll find this is true in your life. There are three things I have found that God uses to achieve His plan for my life, you know, and they all go together. God uses pain, God uses problems, and God uses people. Now, you know, and by the way, that's really in reverse order. People cause problems and they're a pain in your neck, right? I mean, that's the way that works out, right? You can almost trace every problem you've got to people who are a pain, and that's just true. But God says, look, even the people in your life that are a pain in the neck, that's part of my plan. Even the people in your life that you don't like, they're a part of my plan. Even the people that try to do you harm, they are a part of my plan. Now, let's take the obvious, because I hear people say this all the time. How many times have you heard people say, well, you know, you say God is good. Well, then why didn't God prevent this from happening? Why didn't God keep this from happening to me? Why did God not prevent this from me going through this or this happening in my life? All right, let's state the obvious. Could God have prevented those brothers from selling Joseph? Sure. Could God have prevented Joseph from being falsely accused? Yep. Could God have prevented Joseph from being thrown into prison? Yeah. Well, why didn't He? It was all a part of His plan. You're going to see this in a moment, because one of the things that will keep you from bitterness and revenge and wanting to hurt other people who have hurt you and who have harmed you and who have left you holding the bag, one thing you've got to hold on to in all of that, and that's this: I don't care what you do to me. I don't care how well you succeed in trying to hurt me. And I don't care how much it hurts me. God will override it, and He will mean it for my good. God, listen, God is achieving His plan. He is achieving His plan for your life. Number two, God is accomplishing His purpose for my life. He's not just achieving, it's bigger than this. I want you to get this. It's not just He's achieving His plan. God's got bigger things than just a plan. He has a purpose. Because understand something about God's plan for your life, okay? He didn't draw it up last night. He's not doing this on the fly. This is not something that's serendipitous. It's not something that just happens, you know, on the quick. God doesn't have to improvise. God doesn't have to adjust. God's plan for you and God's plan for me are wrapped around the purpose that He has, not just for you and not just for me, but for the entire world, before the world was even created. Because don't you remember this? This is so important. God's plan is always in accordance with His purpose. This is why we get bothered. This is why we get irritated. Because you know what you want God to do? You want God to accomplish your purpose for your life. And I hate to say it this way, but I don't want to make you mad, but if I do, take it up with Him. God says, I really don't give a flying rip about your purpose for your life, because I got a better purpose. And I know what my purpose is for your life. I'm going to accomplish my purpose. That's why God doesn't react when things go wrong in your life. God doesn't react to anything. God acts before everything. He's already there. And what God is saying is this: James, from the day you drew your first breath, when you gave your life to me as a 9-year-old boy, from that moment on, mark it down, I'm funneling everything that happens to you to make sure that at the end of the day, my purpose for your life is going to be accomplished. Now listen, it took Joseph 23 years to finally understand what that purpose was. Well, what was it? Listen to that verse again, the last part of it. But God intended it for good. Now watch this: to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Okay, wait a minute. What lives is Joseph talking about, and who in the world is he referring to? Who needed to be saved? Well, earlier he said this to his brothers: but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Now, what was he talking? Who's he talking to? And what was he talking about? He wasn't just talking to his brothers. You understand that? No, I don't. Let me explain. He wasn't just talking to his brothers. He was talking to the seeds of the nation of Israel that needed to be planted so that God's purpose for this world to send a Savior could be fulfilled. God's plan for you is bigger than you and bigger than your plan for you. God's plan for you is bigger than you, and it's bigger than your plan for you. Things do not happen by coincidence. They happen by providence, and everything is going according to God's planned purpose. So here's the third thing. God is affirming His promise in my life. He's not just achieving His plan in my life. He's not just accomplishing His purpose in my life. God is affirming His promise in my life. Now, this is part of the story I guess is my favorite part. So God's brought Joseph to the top of the mountain, right? He is at the pinnacle of his professional life. He is the prime minister of Egypt. He's got everything. He eats the best food. He drinks the best wine. He's got the best chariot. He's got a personal driver. He's got amanuensis. He's got assistants. Everything is his beck and call. He's waiting on hands and foot. His brothers and his dad are all answering to him just like he thought. Now, watch this. It didn't just happen that way. It had to happen that way. It had to. You say, oh boy, here we go, predestination. Nope, not talking about predestination. Bigger than that. Several chapters earlier, we read this about Joseph as he was standing before his brothers. Then he remembered his dreams about them. Remember those dreams we talked about? What was that dream? It was the dream where God said to Joseph, Joseph, I'm going to make a promise to you. One of these days, you're going to be in a position of authority. And you're going to be over all of your brothers, all of your dad, and they're going to bow at your feet. In other words, God was keeping His promise. Let me tell you how good this is. One of the greatest promises in all the Bible is this one. And we know that in all things, the bad things, the terrible things, the worst things, the unjust things, the fair things, unfair things, in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. The same God that kept His promise to Joseph keeps His promise to me. And the same God that kept His promise to Joseph keeps His promise to us. And the same God that was controlling every part of Joseph's life is controlling ours. He is still in the good grief business. When others are doing their worst to you, God's doing His best for you. God overrides it all. God oversees it all. Listen, you're never a victim of your circumstances. If you know Jesus, you are a victor over your circumstances. Just give God enough time, it will work out. Here's what I want you to understand. I hope you get what I'm saying. There's nothing random about your life. There's nothing that just happens. You're not a victim of bad luck. It's not that, you just draw the short end of the stick. It all has to do with the plan of God and the providence of God and the promises of God and the purpose of God and the presence of God. And God says, I'm going to take all of it. I'm going to take the good stuff and the bad stuff. I'm going to take the mean stuff and the sweet stuff. I'm going to take the dark stuff and the light stuff. And when I mix it up, when it's all said and it's all done, my plan will be accomplished. My purpose will be achieved and my promise will be kept. So, God controls everything and everyone. He not only controls the orbit of the planets and the movement of the galaxies, He controls the clock. He controls the moments of your life. He controls your friends. He controls your family. He controls your foes. See, this is what I love about this story. It's one thing to take something that's good and make it better. That's one thing. It's one thing to take what is better and make it best. That's one thing. But what God loves to do, and He loves to do this, He loves to take what is bad and make it good. And no matter how much you think it looks like your life is totally out of control, God is in control. So again, let's close this out. What if, let's just do a what if for a minute. What if Joseph's brothers had not been filled with jealousy and hatred? He would have never been put in the pit, sold to those human traffickers. Or what if he'd been sold to those human traffickers, but instead of heading to Egypt, they were heading away from Egypt? He would have never been sold to Potiphar. What if he'd never been sold to Potiphar? He would have never encountered Potiphar's wife. What if he'd never encountered Potiphar's wife? He would have never gone to prison. What if he had never gone to prison? He would have never met the man who would put him in touch with Pharaoh. And what if he had never met Pharaoh? He would never interpreted the dream. What if he had not interpreted the dream? He would never become prime minister. What if he had not become prime minister? There wouldn't have been an Israel. What if there had been an Israel? There wouldn't have been a Jesus. What if there had been a Jesus? There wouldn't be a Christianity. What if there had been a Christianity? Every chapter in human history would have a totally different ending, and it wouldn't be good. So if you really want to get down to brass tacks, we're in a church today because Joseph got in that pit. So, understand, say it again. No, the verse doesn't say that, and God doesn't say, and the Bible doesn't say, and I don't say, all things are good. Kidnapping. Racism, cheating, lying, divorce, incest, murder. They are all bad things. But this is what God says. God says, James, Sally, John, Peter, Teresa, whoever. God says, look, your life's like a puzzle. From the time you're born to the time you die, all kinds of pieces are going to that puzzle. Some of those pieces you'll choose, some of those pieces you won't. Some of those pieces you'll put in, some of those pieces somebody else will put in. But here's what I promise you. When the puzzle is complete and the puzzle is done, it won't spell bad, it will spell good. Because I got a plan, and I'm going to work it out. And I got a purpose. I'm going to make sure it comes to fruition. And I've got a promise, and I'm going to keep it. So if you still are sitting there and you're saying, you know, sounds good, nice try, no cigar, I'm not buying it, I'm still ticked, I'm still want revenge, I'm still bitter, I'm still mad, I'm still angry, I just don't believe anything you're saying. I think it's pie in the sky thinking. I just want to give you Exhibit A.